Hello, thanks for joining Rupert Cooks again. Today's recipe is super simple, but I think really useful. Today we're making French bread. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need is 5 cups of bread flour. The difference between bread flour and all-purpose flour is bread flour has a slightly higher gluten content in it, and that means that it's going to give you that nice chew on the bread. The thing is, you can use regular all-purpose flour. I just find it makes kind of a limper loaf that doesn't have quite as much chew and is a little bit more difficult to get off the peel or the cutting board and transfer it into the oven. So I prefer the baking flour, the bread flour, but if you can't get it, all-purpose flour is fine. Or if you just have all-purpose hanging around and that's what you want to use, is totally fine. So 5 cups of bread flour, 2 cups of fairly warm water. This depends on how cold your house is at the time. If it's in the middle of winter and your house is a little bit colder, you might want to go a little bit hotter on the water. If it's summer, like it is now, you don't have to go nearly as hot. The point is to get the yeast to rise when you add it later. So I've gone with like kind of warm to the touch. You can measure it with a thermometer if you want. I gave up on that after a while because I just sort of knew by touch what it was. Something like 80 degrees or so is great in warm weather. In cooler weather, you might even want to go up to 100 degrees because by the time you get done mixing it, it's going to cool down a little bit. So what we're going to do is put that in the mixer with the dough hook, and we are going to mix for 5 minutes. No yeast yet, nothing else, and get a nice kind of dough with it. I will also have words of wisdom on the mixer aspects of this later on. Okay, so this is about the consistency of the dough you should have. See, it's not incredibly sticky, but just a little. And what we're going to do now is just take a regular dishcloth, cover up the bowl, and we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes. This is known as the autolyse period or autolyse period. Some people pronounce it like autolyse, but what that means is the flour is sitting in there, combining with the water and self-producing enzymes because of that reaction and breaking things down a little bit. So it's important to do this so that things break down and then we can add our yeast and our salt later on and not have too crazy stretchy a dough and that kind of thing. So we're going to let it sit for 15 minutes and then come back and add more into the mixer. Okay, the next thing to add is 0.2 ounces of yeast. I like to weigh things just because that's how I am. I feel it's more precise. So I put this shot glass on the scale and pour in until I reach 0.2. Then what I'm going to do is put it into these measuring spoons. It equals 0.2 ounces is just about a slightly rounded tablespoon if you want to go with that. And the reason why I'm doing it with this, I will get to at the end of this video. But we're going to put it into this teaspoon and add it slowly. It should take about a full minute to add all the yeast into there. So we're going to do it with the mixer running and I'll show you. Okay, so dough in the mixer down, lock it, put it on. Then adding slowly. And you can see you're kind of dodging the dough a little bit here. Okay, so I've let the mixer go with the yeast for about 5 minutes. Now it's time to add the salt. I have 2.5 teaspoons of regular table salt. I really wouldn't use kosher for this. I think that the regular table salt mixes in a little bit better. 2.5 teaspoons. Again, I'm going to add it with the cheesy spoons. You do not want a good spoon for this. Use a cheesy one. I'll get to why later. And I'm going to just scoop this out and tap it in. And again, take about a full minute to add it all. And I'm going to let it go for another 5 minutes with that. So let's do that and proceed. Okay, so our dough is all done mixing for 5 minutes. And we're going to get it out and throw it on the board here. I'm using a marble board. If you were doing this in winter, you could actually heat this up a teeny bit in the oven. I wouldn't go too hot, but just a teeny little bit just to keep things warmer, but I'm not going to do that now. But the procedure for doing this is lift the head up. If it's on there a little, you can unstick it, but better if you don't have to. Then flours, hands into the flour, go like this over the board, mix it around. Now, with floured hands, scoop it out so that it hopefully sticks a teeny bit less to your hands and you don't have quite as big of a mess. And just knead it around a little bit just to make sure, get it a little bit drier. This is a touch sticky, but I always feel it's sort of easier to get that last little bit of flour in there if you need it at this stage, rather than attempting to get it in the mixer, because it's much easier to judge. And now it's not sticking to my hands quite so much. Lift it up, a little bit of flour underneath. We're going to stretch it into a little ball, and that's what you're trying to get. You want that sort of smooth texture up on the top, not like, I don't know, I guess it's hard to really describe it any better. You want it to look sort of like a stretched birthday balloon, something like that. And dust it with a little flour. And we are going to set a cloth on it. And since this flour has been running around in this bowl, like somebody's trying to catch a cab in downtown Manhattan during rush hour, all that gluten in there is really stirred up and really stretchy and everything. So we want to let this rest a little bit, 15 minutes, like if they caught that cab and the dough is resting and just relaxing that little bit and getting annoyed at the driver talking too much, just like the kitty's talking too much right now. But we'll let it rest 15 minutes, then come back to it. All right, so after 15 minutes, we can take this off. And you can see even now our dough's expanded a little bit, but we get it all up, stretch it one way, stretch it another way, perpendicular, and do the exact same thing as before. Get it into a nice ball. Cover it again. And now comes the longest part. We need to wait until this has pretty much doubled in volume. That can take, this time of year, it'll probably take an hour, hour and a half. In the wintertime, it can take up to 3 hours. So you need to start this in the morning if you want to do it then. But we're going to wait until this doubles and then proceed. Okay, as you can see, voila, it has risen quite a bit. So we are going to smack this down. And I really like these pastry scrapers for this. I'm going to divide this into quarters. You can divide this however you would like. The top tends to dry out a teeny bit. So we're going to throw a little flour here on the back. And we are going to, again, make our stretched balloon skin balls out of each quarter. And I fold them so that the dough dries out a little bit on the top. It's not anything to worry about, but I'm trying to sort of fold that back into the middle of the whole thing so it's all consistent. If you do the warming it in the oven thing to get it to rise faster in the wintertime, you might be aware and want to be aware that that can really dry out the top. So you might want to cover it with something a little bit less porous than um, cloth, but I don't really do that. So again, we are into letting the gluten relax a little bit after all that ball rolling and everything. Okay, so our little balls have been resting for about 15 minutes. If you don't want to wait the full 15, that's fine. Just be aware that if the dough is, when you're rolling it out, stretching and then snapping back, that's the gluten fighting you. And it can be very frustrating. So we're going to put it down here. Then we're going to use our hands and go from fingertips, what is that? The fingertip to the heel, full strokes to try and get a nice round, reasonably even loaf. And you see how that's snapping back? That's the gluten. That's okay. I mean, it's always going to snap back some. Then I'm going to put it here on the towel. And you see I've like left a little edge here. I'll lift it up here. Do the same thing. If you need more flour on your hands, boom, there you go. So again, heel, fingertips, try and see that? That is just not quite right there. Try and get it into a nice shape. It's going to rise more when we set it aside, so it doesn't have to be anything too perfect. And we're just trying to get this done efficiently, because by now you've got what, like half an hour to make the dough, 2 hours for sitting around rising. Now we're doing this. It's time consuming, which is why very often people don't bake their own bread, because it's a big, huge time suck. But we are doing it for the extreme craft of it. And you might have seen those things that are, I don't know, they're made out of perforated metal. And they have U-shaped troughs for putting your bread in, and then it rises a little bit and forms into this perfect U shape. I don't need another gadget in my kitchen. I'm talking about sharking for a living, chief. So if you want one, get one, but I just lay it out like this and put a towel over it. And we're going to let this sit for about an hour. In the meantime, what we need is to start preheating our oven. Okay, so I'm going to preheat to 420. Damn it. Preheat it to 425. And I'm doing that while this is resting, because that's going to heat up for a solid hour, because we want a nice, hot, even oven where the whole oven's heated up. Prior to doing that, I put one rack on the lowest setting possible, another rack directly above that. So I'm basically using the bottom third of the oven. I'm going to put in a pizza stone on the upper rack of that. On the bottom, I've got a really nasty jelly roll pan. You might notice a few things. This pizza stone is black. They're usually this sort of lighter color. This is black because I've used it so much, and I don't know, oil's gotten on it and it's blackened it up. This actually makes it better because it is absorbing the radiation, the radiant heat. Black absorbs it better. This is disgusting because I use it just for this. And it's going to go under the pizza stone in the oven. So they're going to be sitting there like this. The bread's going to go on this, and I'm going to throw water in this. This is going to be heated up to 425, and then we're going to throw cold water in it. That is going to warp it. Do not use a good jelly roll pan for this. If you want, you can just throw the water in the bottom of the oven directly. We're going to be throwing in a half a cup every loaf. That's a little problematic. If you have gas, you could put out the flame or something. I just kind of get nervous about doing that, so I put this in there. You could also put in an old frying pan. old cast iron frying pan, something like that. But basically, that's what you want to do. And the water in there is simulating a baker's steam oven. You're going to throw it in, it's going to fill the whole thing up with steam, and it's going to give you that chew on bread that makes it so good when it's made at home. And that's part of why it's going stale, is because that water is evaporating from it and everything. So you could also use, if you didn't have a pizza stone, because I know these things are kind of expensive, you could go to Home Depot and get some terracotta tiles. I don't know, 6x6 tiles. You get like like 3x4, like 12 tiles. I don't know if it's going to cost you any less than this. You could use brick, but that's going to take a lot hotter to heat up, longer to heat up, and it's going to be a real pain to store. So I don't know if I would do that, but it would give you that real brick oven taste. So at any rate, that's going to be our step. I better get these in. So these are preheating. Do not leave these out for the hour while this is going on. You want these in the oven. No water in this as of yet. We're going to put that in right as we put the bread in. So we will get these in and preheating and be back in an hour. Okay, as you can see, our bread has risen up again and is quite a bit larger. At this point, we're going to have to do a few things. We're going to have to get the bread on. I'm using my cutting board as a peel. You need this dry. It can't be wet. If it's wet, the bread's going to stick to it. I have 1/2 cup of water in here. This is a 1 cup measure, but it's half full. And the oven has been heating up for an hour. So let's get the loaf here transferred over to the peel. And let's just go ahead and do another one. Cover up those. And if you see, if you punch the bread with your finger there, it doesn't spring right back. And that's pretty much what you want here. You also need a very sharp knife, because what we're going to do is score this on the top. And this is its own little art form. A lot of people make designs and all this kind of thing, and it gets very intricate. It's actually pretty cool if you see it sometimes. But we need an extremely sharp knife. This can't be something that, it should be able to slice a tomato easily without smushing the tomato. Okay? You could use like a single-edged razor blade, or if you have a drywall job going on, just flip that blade and the drywall knife around so the sharp end is pointed out, brand new. Go ahead with that. You get that drywall flavor going on. So I'm just going to do it 3 times, and you have to do it. Getting the feel right is a little bit tricky, but you have to do it quickly so that you get a nice clean cut without dragging the dough and all of that kind of thing. So I'm going to get my fingers like this, and boom, and boom, boom. Flip it around. This knife could be sharper. Boom, boom, boom. 3. Just going to do that. Now, I'm going to get these in the oven. Okay, so we're going to open the oven, throw it right in. Oven comes out. Pull out your top. It's hot as anything. Oh, almost messed. There we go. Tip that off. Boom. Get that one on. Close it with this thing. Then you got your tin in there. Throw the 1/2 cup of water in the jelly pan. Close it right away. Okay, you might have noticed I did 2 at a time, flipping around and shushing them off onto the hot rock there, the pizza stone. If you're doing this for the first time, you might want to do it 1 loaf at a time. I also know my oven very well because I've done this quite a few times. I know it takes exactly 23 minutes at 425 degrees to cook the bread. Your time might vary. It also depends on how well you've preheated, all those kinds of things. So you've got to experiment a little bit. You're trying to get a nice golden crust on there, but if you notice that was quite rapid, you are trying to get, the stone pulled out, dough on, water tossed, the whole thing closed up very quickly. So stone goes in the oven, water goes in the oven, dough's in the oven. Our dough. Farewell and adieu to your fair Spanish ladies. Okay, so it's been 23 minutes. Our bread is out. You can see it's got a nice color to it. Just doing this to display. You actually want to set them like this when you are letting them cool down because it's a smaller surface and you're less chance of water condensation going on here. They dry a little bit better. Okay, and here's our bread all done. Got nice browning on the loaves. And let's slice one open here. See, it's nice inside. It's could have a little bit more air holes in it, but overall very nice. It's actually good to have it a little bit dense because I prefer eating this with some sort of dip or something like that, or using it for sandwiches, not just hunk of bread in a basket for dinner. One thing I did want to mention is I spoke to adding the yeast and the salt into the mixer using the cheesy aluminum measuring spoons. And there's a good reason for that. About a week and a half ago, I was making bread again. And I had my little shot glass with my yeast in it. And I was tapping it. And as I said, you got to do that over the span of about a minute. So you're sitting there tapping it for a while, and the dough is whipping around in there. And I swear it was like a tentacle from the Kraken that just came whipping up, grabbed that shot glass out of my hand, and it went right into the bowl of the mixer. What happened then was the dough hook jammed, and before I could get my hand on it and turn it off, because I was afraid of that, before I could do that, it stripped the gear. It was like a second, 2 seconds to strip that gear. I was upset because mixers are now quite expensive, although you can get them used and it's not really too bad. I just wasn't really up for it. So I took it apart and I was stunned because that is not any top of the line KitchenAid. I think I got it on special and all of that kind of thing. But when I opened it up, I was quite surprised that the planetary gears that work the action there, it's like a ring gear and then another gear inside it and a worm gear and another worm drive gear. They were all metal with the exception of one gear, the worm gear that takes the output from the motor and turns it. And that was made out of nylon or some sort of plastic. And it was actually quite interesting because all the other gears were metal. So this was made to be the one gear that fails. And the reason why it is like that is not because it's cheap or anything, but because it's safer. If you get your hand caught in there, it could jam and take a finger right off, or hurt your finger very badly. So that gear is designed to shred the second you jam up the mixer. And it's designed to do so quite quickly in order to prevent any hand damage from the cracking dough coming out and yanking your finger in there. So I went on Amazon and I looked, and you can get just that little gear, which apparently fits quite a wide variety of KitchenAid mixers. Just that little gear is about $5, and it's about a half an hour to take the, it was the first time I'd taken it apart. But the thing of it is when you take it apart, you will need some actual tools, some facility with them to take it apart. It is not a hard job at all. It just takes some time and you need a good work surface. So if you have tools in the tool drawer in the house, you might not want to do this. If you have tools in the workshop of the house, like with a workbench, you can do it. There's plenty of YouTube videos on how to do it, but I'll warn you, when you take that thing apart, there's as much grease inside that thing as the differential on a pickup truck. And it is a little bit messy, but if you take your time, it's not that hard. It's $5 gear, and it's really not that big a deal. But that's why I was adding the, and insisted on it, adding the salt in the yeast with the aluminum spoons, because those things are so cheap and cheesy that should they get seized by the dough or I drop them in, they will just fold up. And, I can turn it off. I'll have enough time to turn it off because they're probably not going to jam it. I don't know because I've never really tried, but they won't jam it. So that's the reason for that. I thought I would just bring it to the table since it was a little bit of a shocking experience for me. But once again, thank you for watching Rupert Cooks. Please join us for the next episode. There's some video playlists in the description that show my other videos, as well as a subscribe button, the little sort of green thing with a handle on it. And if you subscribe, it makes me very happy. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.